And welcome everyone. We're delighted that we have such a diverse group from St. Augustine that came out tonight, especially given the water weather. We want to thank several people who helped us put this event together. Suzanne Olson, Natalie Harder, Cindy Rockefeller, Susie Carlson, Jackie, and of course we want to thank Tim for graciously accepting our invitation, not having a clue who we were, but I just contacted him and said, hey Tim, St. Augustine really wanted to hear about the Sable Trail. Would you come and talk to us about it? And shortly after that, I was fortunate enough to meet Casey, because Jackie Rock and I were the only two protesters up at the Sawgrass Wells Fargo event. And we got to meet some great people from Standing Rock who also then connected us with Casey. So we invited Casey to introduce Tim Canova tonight and talk a little bit about his experiences.
So the pipeline's being built on treaty land. The pipeline was it started running this week. The pipeline wasn't in the ground. The pipeline didn't go through an approval process that if it goes across native land. This is treaty land. This belongs to the Lakota, and that's what they were standing for. They were standing for sacred water, but to the Lakota, it was about the treaty land. For a lot of people that went there, it was just about water, or just about the environment. But to the Lakota, and if you would go there and stand with them, for the Lakota, it was all about spirit and land, and it's all about the 500-year trail of tears that all indigenous people have gone through in this hemisphere that got to the Backwater Bridge. I'm wearing tonight a bandana, the Backwater Bridge. Over 700 people were injured that night. Many critical, many still walking wounded. It was something you should Google. It's a whole series of stories. There's lots of videos about it. It was, you have the rubber bullet? We looked at the films and it looked like there was over 5,000 of these fired at us that night at Backwater Bridge. This is the one, my second trip to the medics unit that night. The battle went from dusk till dawn. This was pulled out of my thinking. It just missed me and got in the back. I went in for the second time after being hit with tear gas. We don't have to fight that hard here. When I was arrested, I wasn't arrested in North Dakota. I was arrested when the Wells Fargo stockholders were having their annual meeting at Sawgrass Marriott Resort and Spa. Give them a plug. I heard about that was happening again online. I said, I went 2,000 miles to stand with Lakota in a blizzard. It's 15 degrees. I certainly could go 45 minutes to Sawgrass and protest the bank that's the largest bank feeding money into these non-renewable resource companies, the fracking companies, and the Dakota Access Pipeline. They were the big guy giving you the money so those things can operate. And we've had a lot of success with European banks pulling out, because Europeans look at the United States and they see us, Europeans, as not Americans. They see us as European Americans, Black Americans, European Americans. And they see natives as Americans. And they don't have to be taught in school to this myth that they believe that the United States performed genocide. And so they're empathetic. But we don't understand that they performed genocide. And they were performing genocide on the people in North Dakota. And the reason we don't have anybody here that knows that this is Tibetan territory, most of us didn't know. Most of us are listening to hear the Tibetan and the trees, and the rain, and the ground, and the flowers. Most of us don't listen to the dolphins sing the Tibetan songs. We don't even know about the Tibetan. But if we're going to heal this earth, if we're going to be able to be righteous in our love for earth and for each other, to forgive the police who shot me, as I went to them after about the 10th hour, I went to the front row. And I raised my hands, I had saved one hand, I had that bullet in my other hand, and this was my third time going back to the front row that night. And I stood and looked over those razor wires at those police who were firing at all night long. I told him, my name is Casey Leydon. I come from St. Augustine, unceded Timucua territory. Unceded land. That's all I'm saying. I come representing the Timucua. I come representing the people of St. Augustine. People I haven't met yet. I know you wanted me to be there representing you. And I called your name ahead in advance. So let me know. But I called your names. I said, they're here. I said, I'm an Eagle Scout. I'm a father of 3 grown men. I've come here to stand with North Dakota. Why are you standing here tonight? I told them, they looked at me, they're just 10 feet from me. And this is like 3 in the morning. The whole place reeks of tear gas. There's just little palms in the back. I'm standing there looking at them and I said, why are you here tonight? I said, I'm here to protect the water. Who are you here to protect? And I gotta love that guy. And that's what I told him. He said, I came here to tell you 3 words. And I used my best theater voice of life. Last person in the last row could hear it, and I belled that out. I love you. And they all turned away, except for one who looked at me and cried. They all turned away. They heard me say that. They couldn't face it for what they've been doing all night long. I went to the top of that hill, and I turned back. I was heading back to camp about 4 in the morning. I looked back down, going back over the bridge. Looked down all of that, the smoke, and they were getting back with hand grenades and the 2 gas rockets, and the water cannons and the sound cannons. I stood at the top of the hill, and I started crying. I said, why? Why did they shoot me tonight? Why? And I looked up and I put my hands up and I screamed out as loud as I could, why? I felt this hand on my shoulder. It was 62, a man about 62, but it looks like he's been living a lot longer than that, standing next to me. Turns out he's an elder with the Cheyenne River Sioux tribe who was there that night. And he said, they shot you because they thought you were Lakota. I lifted up my ski goggles. I pulled down this bandana. I said, but I'm white. And he said to me, every man who stands with us is Lakota. So we must be Lakota. And we must know the Timucua. They're here. They want you to work with this water. They're here to make us successful. They're here to raise up great warriors like Tim. And we need to support Tim. We need not to let him have to be out there going like taking arrows and arrows and arrows. We need to stand up for Carol. Mention Tim in our prayers. Make sure he gets a hug, a real hug for everybody. So make sure you give this guy a hug. He has fought the Democratic Party. And he put his name, said, my name is Tim, and I'm coming after you. And this guy did that. And this guy's courageous. And if nobody else showed up here tonight, I was going to be here for Tim.
Thank you, Casey. That's such a beautiful introduction. And Carolyn, thank you for getting in touch with me and inviting me here. I wanted to come to St. Augustine. I'm glad to visit with my cousin Judy and Eugene over here. Judy and I go all the way back to New York, where I grew up. My father was a dreamer. He was an immigrant who came to this country as a 2-year-old. We found out a lot more about my dad in recent years. And he grew up in an extended Italian immigrant home in Brooklyn, New York. And any Brooklyn people here? Any New York transplants? When I asked this question in South Florida, almost every hand was up. When I ran last year against Wasserman Schultz, she tried to make it an issue that I hadn't been living in Florida for as many years as her. And I would just ask folks, how many folks are from New York? And half the room would be New Yorkers. I am pleased to be here to talk to you about the Sable Trail pipeline. And it's a pipeline that I learned about during my campaign. Casey mentioned Wells Fargo, one of the big financial institutions behind not just Keystone, but also the Dakota Access Pipeline and the Sable Trail Pipeline. And I feel like I've been railing against Wells Fargo and JP Morgan and Citibank for a lot of years, before I even thought much about pipelines. I'm a lawyer, I'm a law professor, and for 20 years, I've been out there writing and advocating against these Wall Street banks. And again, not because of the environmental issues, but because of the economic issues. What these Wall Street banks have done to this economy of ours. It's not the country that we grew up in. It's not a Main Street economy anymore, it's a Wall Street economy. And we see bigger and bigger inequalities in wealth and income and political power. And those inequalities and political power translate into environmental hazards right here in this state. I was an Occupy LA activist when I was a law professor on the West Coast in California. And I moved here, took a job teaching at Nova Southeastern University in Fort Lauderdale. And I got active with the local citizens trade campaign. And we were advocating, we were lobbying our congressional delegation against the Trans-Pacific Partnership. How many folks here have heard of the TPP? And Bernie made it a big issue. And I know as a scholar, as somebody who's taught international trade law, why the TPP is such a bad deal. It's got these investor rights provisions in there, where big corporations can challenge national, state, local environmental regulations, all kinds of regulations. In fact, when President Obama canceled the Keystone XL pipeline, TransCanada, one of the largest energy companies in the world, announced it was going to sue the United States, not in a US court, but in a NAFTA tribunal, North American Free Trade Agreement, in one of their arbitration panels, under the same kinds of provisions that would be in the Trans-Pacific Partnership. It allows this energy company to claim that any regulation, law, jury award, executive order in this country that infringes on their future profits, they should be compensated for it. And it's not in federal court. These are private arbitration judges who are deciding these cases. And TransCanada said they were going to challenge President Obama's decision to cancel the Keystone XL pipeline and sue for $15 billion. So this has a chilling effect on all kinds of environmental regulations. Well, here I was, just a lonely law professor, hooking up with other community activists in a parking lot in Pembroke Pines, protesting to try to get our Congresswoman to vote against fast-tracking this trade agreement. Tenured law professor in the only law school in her district, and I call up her office and I try to write to her legislative aide. I want to talk to them about the investor-state dispute settlement provisions. We get nowhere. No phone calls answered, no emails answered. And the stories I hear from the people in the Citizens Trade Campaign is worse. When they went to protest her Aventura office, the police are called. So we were very frustrated. Wasserman Schultz was the only Democrat in the House delegation to vote to fast-track this agreement. And my friends with the communication workers and the national nurses, we were all thinking somebody's got to challenge this incumbent, complacent, corporate-owned Congresswoman in a primary. I did not think I was going to be the one to do that at all. We started thinking, who's the state representatives around here? Who's the mayor? Who are the local politicians who maybe would have an interest in doing that? Of course, none of them did. She also happened to be the head of the Democratic National Committee. Has a chilling effect on challenges. For me, the turning point was December of 2015. Some of you will remember from the Bernie Sanders campaign, when Wasserman Schultz had her DNC denying access to the Sanders campaign for the voter database. And in one day, Bernie Sanders filed a lawsuit, and hundreds of thousands of Americans across the country contributed small donations, and he raised $1 million in one day. And at that point, I thought, what the hell? If I were already a candidate, I'd be raising money against this candidate, against this incumbent. And about 2 weeks later, I was in. And, you know, some people were calling me the mini Bernie. Of course, Bernie has more hair than me. But it was just like Bernie's campaign. I pledged I wouldn't take a penny from any corporations, from any political action committees. And we raised the money online, small donations. And, you know, believe me, I got a lot of political advice, a lot of political operatives, once we started raising the money, suddenly coming over and trying to tell me how to run this campaign. And one of the first things these insiders tell you to do is to spend 30 hours a week on the telephone doing what they call call time. 60 Minutes did an episode on this during the campaign. You sit around calling lists of wealthy donors for 30 hours a week begging them for money. And you do this week in and week out. And after a while, when you spend 30 hours a week on the phone with these folks, you start adopting the worldview. Even the best of intentioned politicians, I can't imagine how their views, their ideals don't start changing. And I laughed at that suggestion. I said, this is going to be a grassroots campaign. I had enough confidence that the American people were looking at my opponent the way I was looking at her. And in fact, I had a clearer view of her because most people only knew her as the head of the DNC who was tipping the scales against Bernie. We did our research at the time of the TPP debates, and we saw, while she's on cable TV railing against Republicans, she's actually been taking millions of dollars from the biggest corporations and Wall Street banks in the country for years. And she's been pushing their interests on issue after issue, from payday lenders to private prisons. And during the campaign, you know, I got to the pipeline issue through fracking. I was never a fracker. I was always an anti-fracker. Ever since I saw Josh Fox's movie Gasland. How many folks here have seen Gasland? I mean, that movie is just an amazing movie. You see people who thought they were going to make riches. They signed away their rights to their lands, and here they are some months later, and they turn on their kitchen faucets, and you can light a match under the kitchen faucets. Their livestock are dying. They've got to move from their homes. And it took 5 more years for the Obama administration's Environmental Protection Agency to come out with their conclusions, their findings. Not until December of 2016, when Obama was a lame duck president, did his EPA conclude that fracking contaminates drinking water. Well, the Sabal Trail Pipeline is a 515-mile pipeline through Alabama and Georgia into northern and central Florida. And when completed, and it's just about completed, when the switch is turned on, which could be later this month, it will pump 1 billion cubic feet of highly pressurized fracked gas a day through the Upper Floridian Aquifer. And the Upper Floridian Aquifer is sinkhole country. I remember 2 or 3 years ago, a 30-something-year-old man sleeping in his bed was swallowed up. His body was never found. We know what sinkholes are like in Florida. They can happen anywhere. And the environmental permits that were given by the EPA, by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, the process was all streamlined. These were not thorough review processes at all. One of the reasons they weren't thorough processes is that our governor, Rick Scott, has invested over $700,000 in the consortium of companies building this pipeline. That's the Republican side. On the Democratic side, we've got Debbie Wasserman Schultz. One of her biggest contributors is Nexstar, the parent company of Florida Power and Light. They are building this pipeline. Bill Nelson, U.S. Senator. We want him to win re-election. We certainly don't want a Republican to beat him. He's taken over $70,000 from Nexstar. So you have a political system in this country, and really in Florida, it's shocking, that is a corporate-owned political establishment, both parties. And so I start becoming more acquainted with these environmental issues. Down in South Florida, there's a tendency to say, well, the Sabal Trail Pipeline is far north. Why should I care much about that pipeline? We have a lot of environmental challenges in South Florida. We see big sheets of Antarctica falling into the seas. We see climate change happening, rising sea levels. So in South Florida, what do the rising sea levels look like? They look like flooded streets. They also look like the very beginning of the salination of the Biscayne Aquifer. If present trends continue, the drinking water in South Florida might be gone. unless we develop technologies and ways to deal with this. Part of the reason the Biscayne Aquifer is in such peril is that it's not being replenished from Lake Okeechobee. The big sugar farms south of Okeechobee block Okeechobee from draining naturally into the Everglades. Well, this is a problem that goes back so many years, and Florida voters voted for Amendment 1 to allow the government, the state government, to use its powers of eminent domain, right? When the state can take private property for a public purpose, they would take the sugar farms, pay money for it. I think that Amendment 1 earmarked certain taxes from real estate transactions. And the plan was, this is a Charlie Crist plan, it goes back so many years, to convert those sugar farms into marshland. So they would naturally filter the pesticides, the fertilized water from Okeechobee, from the agriculture runoff, into the Everglades. The Everglades would be replenished. It would help stave off the salination of the Biscayne Aquifer. Well, I won't go into details, but that Charlie Crist plan, that Amendment 1, has been stopped, it's been stymied. The state legislature this past term passed the Joe Negron bill. They're trying to deal with the problem, but it's happening very slowly. And then north of there is the Sable Trail Pipeline. That upper fluoridated aquifer, even though the Sable Trail Pipeline doesn't go through St. Augustine, the upper fluoridated aquifer provides the drinking water for 60% of the state. So we're playing Russian roulette with both aquifers. The South Florida Biscayne Aquifer at the same time that we're going to have this Sable Trail Pipeline. But I hear we need the Sable Trail Pipeline. We need it for our energy needs in this state. That's what I hear when you talk to industry folks and when you talk to politicians. When you look at the actual studies, that Sable Trail fracked gas that's coming from other states is going to be exported in the form of liquefied natural gas to points in Europe and Asia. And they are now greenlining, streamlining the permits for liquefied natural gas facilities in Hialeah, in Fort Lauderdale, in Martin County, near Stewart. So we don't even need this. And the frustration is that I've been feeling, and that I'm sure so many folks in Florida, is that this is a fossil fuel economy that we're still dealing with. Why are we still wedded to this technology from the past? Okay, natural gas is better than coal, I get it. But that's not the only choices. This is the sunshine state. You know, I am so tired of seeing Florida Power and Light, FP&L TV commercials, where they start and open up by showing this beautiful visual of a solar field. There must be 1,000 solar panels. We were the first ones to build a big solar field, and we're building 3 more. Under FP&L's own estimates, solar will make up only 4% of the state's energy needs in 6 years from now. 4%. And what FPL is doing behind the scenes at the state legislature level is trying to kill all solar. You could have 1,000 solar panels in a field, but what they don't want is millions of solar panels on millions of rooftops, like we see happening in Germany. Germany has converted so quickly to solar, or is in the process of converting so quickly to solar, that these utility companies, their whole business model is turned upside down. They actually have to pay the customers for the energy produced on their rooftops. FP&L does not want that. They are a natural monopoly. They get a guaranteed rate of return of 10, 11%. And if you took solar panels and put them on half the acreage of the 515-mile Sable Trail Pipeline, you'd produce more energy each day that is going to flow through there in the form of frack gas. Okay? And you'd be creating a sustainable, renewable source of jobs for this state while protecting the drinking water. Now let's get back to the drinking water for a moment. If that Sable Trail Pipeline breaks open because of the sinkhole, that's 1 billion cubic feet a day of frack gas. I don't know how long it'll take them to turn the switch off, but presumably a lot of frack gas gets into that aquifer. Well, the FP&L spokespeople say, no, that's not what happens. Gas is lighter than air. the molecules will rise. It will not harm the water. This is their argument. I speak to geologists, all kinds of scientists from the University of Miami up to Georgia, and they all say that's nonsense. Some molecules are lighter than air, but a lot of them are not. And it's likely to contaminate the aquifer. And then, of course, if it busts open beneath the Suwannee River, the Crystal River, the Santa Fe River, some of these rivers are homes to endangered manatees, to endangered species of all kinds. If it busts open underneath the ground or the wetlands, it's an even bigger problem. But not to worry, it might not happen. It might not happen in 6 months, it might not happen in 6 years. But I would argue it's likely to happen at some point. And to kick the can down the road and say that's the problem for our children or our grandchildren is what's very irresponsible. I look at the generation that I'm from, that we're from. Probably no generation in human history was ever born into a bigger lap of luxury than us here in the United States at that point in time. We're born into an infrastructure that was put into place by the sacrifices of my father's generation. The greatest generation that survived the Great Depression and had a New Deal and built up the infrastructure and fought in World War II and had the Marshall Plan and the GI Bill. And they hand us this amazing infrastructure, but what's taken is never renewed. Our generation, I don't know what they call our generation. It's from the baby boomers all the way to my students, the millennials. But it's a free rider generation. We have won the lottery by when we were born into the lap of luxury, but we have not made the sacrifices, the investments to hand something better in the future. And I look at the kind of future that my students have, and my nephews and my nieces, and it's not a good economy. There are not a lot of jobs waiting for them, whatever they call the official unemployment rate, which is a lot of BS. And that's the fight that we're in. And it's a political fight. It's a political fight because there are political interests, there are politicians who are on the payroll, who are stopping rational solutions. And I've been noticing it for the past year, and I know you all see it too, that the people are ahead of the politicians in this state. The people passed a solar amendment on August 30th last year, a supermajority of the voters of Florida. And that's after FP&L spent tens of millions of dollars on a propaganda campaign trying to tell us that it was a bad referendum. And if that wasn't enough, what did FP&L then do? They then put their own phony solar referendum on the November ballot, spent another tens of millions of dollars, and they were going to win that referendum. But social media came alive, the grassroots came alive, ordinary folks started to educate each other because the mass media wasn't educating us. The same way the mass media does not talk about the Sabal Trail pipeline. And when it was time, on that election day in November, the people of the state rejected that fake solar amendment that was put up by FP&L. The people can beat these corporations, but speaking out in our everyday lives, educating ourselves, our loved ones, strangers. We live in a world with social media where it's all possible. You know, over the years, I had folks telling me, you should run for office, Tim. You've been writing on these issues, you've been thinking about these issues. And I would absolutely laugh. I'm like, run for office? I'm not a millionaire, I don't have money. And I'm not about to start asking corporate interests for money. But now we live in a world where it was social media and grassroots that financed my campaign last year. You know, we, like the mini Bernie that I said I was, that we are. 209,000 times somebody in this country clicked on their computer mouse and donated on average $17 to my campaign. And we spent it in the district for the most part. Bernie had one field office in all of South Florida. We had 4 field offices in my one district. We employed hundreds of people, volunteers knocking on doors, 10,000 doors a day in the heat of the summer last year. And you know, while we fell short, there's lots of theories as to why we fell short. We're still trying to inspect the ballots. Months later, had to bring a lawsuit against the Broward Supervisor of Elections just to see the ballots. But let's even assume it was a fair and square loss. I was a candidate for less than 8 months. She's been in politics in the state for 25 years. She has the biggest corporations in the world by her back. endorsements from the President of the United States, the presumed future President of the United States. Folks were scared of her and thought that she was going to be in the next White House or cabinet. Didn't work out that way, for good or bad. And we're going right back at her this coming year. But I want to get back to the Sable Trail. You know, knocking off a politician like Wasserman Schultz is important if this movement's going to grow. But in between elections is when a lot of damage is done. And the Sable Trail can do a lot of damage. We're out of bullets, pretty much. The environmental authorities have green-lighted it. The politicians are silent on it. What can ordinary folks do? Well, one thing that we're trying to push is a divestment movement, okay? And some of you will remember in the 1980s, the divestment movement was a catalyst to bring change to apartheid South Africa. It was only when university endowments were divesting from big corporations and big banks that things started to change. That people realized that business would not go on as usual in South Africa. That the regime had to change because it was being strangled economically. Well, in this day and age, we have alternatives to Wells Fargo and the big banks. And I know it takes a little time to change our banks to a community bank, but they're out there, and it only takes a little time. How many folks here are graduates of a university in Florida or have loved ones who are graduates of universities in Florida? A lot of you. Those universities have big endowments, collectively in the billions. They should not be invested in fossil fuel industries. I mean, just think about it. The Sunshine State is leading the country in sinking into the ocean, and we're going to keep investing in yesterday's economy. We should be leading the way. You know, there's been all this talk about the Paris Climate Accords, which really did nothing. They were just guidelines. Walking away from it is walking in the wrong direction. But we've got to do something more than an accord that has only guidelines. We need to convert as fast as possible to a renewable, solar, wind, wave, tidal type of energy economy. And this has been going on for years. You could take a look at what John Kennedy was saying in 1960. He was talking about renewables. But the oil and gas industry is a very powerful industry in this country. Franklin Roosevelt used to say you can't get elected without oil and gas, and you can't govern with them. And they're not just a threat to our politics and contaminating our politics. They're not just a threat to our water. They're a threat globally at this point. There's so many war zones now, especially in the Middle East, even Syria. You don't see this on TV much, but you could look it up online. There are competing pipelines for Syria. There is a Western Saudi Qatar project that wants a pipeline through Syria, competing with the Iranian Russian pipeline through Syria, where the destination is always Europe to export oil and gas. So at this point, divestment. It doesn't rely on politicians. It's something that we can all work on. We can all educate ourselves. We could be bringing that education to the universities. These universities are sadly not places of learning when they're ignoring these kinds of challenges to the state of Florida. I think the pressure has to be raised not just on universities, but state and local governments around the country. You see Seattle. I heard New York City now is going to divest from Wells Fargo. The city of Seattle did a few months ago. We got to be pressuring our county governments, our city governments, our state government to start moving their funds out of Wall Street banks when the Wall Street banks don't care about us, when they're just caring about their profit margins. You know, in this last legislative session, FP&L was pushing a bill, which would have been the first in the country. It would have required ratepayers to pay the costs of FP&L's exploratory fracking in other states. That got defeated. I was surprised it got defeated, but again, it just shows that when the word gets out and around and people get upset, that we can actually fight back against these corporate interests. and we just got to keep fighting them. I'd like to open up for discussion. I don't want to just go on and drone on. And so, who first? Yes, could you please introduce yourself?
My name's Debbie Wasserman Schultz. I'm from Flowers County, Indivisible. And since we've been indivisible and going to these events and rallies and so forth, I've been starting to read the Koch brothers and the Jordan money.
I'm glad you brought up the Koch brothers. Yes, the question was about the Koch brothers, Sandy from Indivisible. And the Koch brothers, of course, is this right-wing billionaire family that has made a fortune in petrochemicals and private prisons and privatizing roads. That's really what we're living in right now, is a time of privatization of everything.
And they're also in universities. They're funding programs in universities that are pushing their libertarian.
Yes, so the comment went on that the Koch brothers are also funding university programs. Sometimes it's research centers in universities, but they're propagating their ideology. There's one Koch brother initiative I want to bring up, actually. It was reported in the New York Times some months ago. I think it's called Fuel Forward USA. And it's millions of dollars that the Koch brothers are spending through this front organization. And Fuel Forward is contributing money mostly to very poor neighborhoods around the country, to poor communities, to leaders in the African American and Hispanic communities, low-income communities, to convince them that fossil fuels are their friends. Fossil fuels keeps their energy costs down, that solar is expensive, and that solar is a wealthy white person's pipe dream. So it's complete propaganda, and yet it's out there in those communities and it's growing. That's what we have to fight against. We've got to be making the argument that fossil fuels is not just an environmental challenge, an environmental threat, but this is also a social justice and racial justice issue. The Sabal Trail pipeline goes through poor neighborhoods for the most part, and quite often neighborhoods of color. And the economy of the past does not provide the jobs that are needed by this rising generation. Solar is the kind of economy that could be very sustainable, that could provide the kind of jobs. It should be an infant industry that's protected by the government. We should not have to compete with China's solar production. You know, and to say that is to offer a word of criticism about this whole free trade model that we've been experimenting with for 20 years now. When I was a child, we never would have traded freely with the Soviet Union. We wouldn't have. The human rights violations under communism were repugnant. There were no free labor unions there. It would have made no sense to have outsourcing of American jobs to the Soviet bloc. And yet, this is exactly what we've been doing with China. And it is a certain type of moral relativism, where, well, the United States has a lot of problems. We've done a lot of bad things here in our country and overseas over the years, so who are we to say how bad China is or other countries? And it leads to this race to the bottom, where there's no real enforceable labor standards or environmental standards. And I think it's one of the reasons we see these growing inequalities of wealth and income in this country. And this is happening at the same time that we have, aside from trade and outsourcing, we've got automation and computerization and robotization, where a lot of things are being automated now. We've got to be having real discussions about how to create jobs for the future, how to have a new deal for this generation, a new deal that reinvents the public sector, reinvigorates the public sector. That's what Roosevelt's New Deal did. You know, I'm a student of the New Deal. I write a lot about how Franklin Roosevelt broke up the big banks, used the Federal Reserve to help Main Street, created a national infrastructure bank that we don't have anymore. Back then it was called the Reconstruction Finance Corporation. We're one of the only advanced industrial countries in the world without a national infrastructure bank. China, Germany, Japan, you name it. Bill Clinton campaigned for one in 1992. Barack Obama campaigned for it in 2008. These are campaign promises that get thrown out the window because Wall Street doesn't want it. Wall Street would rather have state and local governments paying higher interest rates on the bond markets to build that sewage treatment facility, to work on infrastructure, to rebuild schools, you name it. An infrastructure bank is a way to funnel money at near 0% interest to the public sector, so that the public sector is not always strapped for money having to privatize. And this has been like airbrushed out of history. This was what made the country great during the New Deal and got us up strong and ready for World War II. If the New Deal hadn't happened in the 1930s, this country would not have been ready to take on World War II. And instead, we were ready and we won the war in 3.5 years. And that's what we have to be doing here. You take a look at the New Deal, it wasn't just breaking up the banks and having an infrastructure bank. Public power was central to the New Deal. Public power, the idea that public utilities that provide our energy should be publicly owned because they don't need to make a 10% rate of return every year. They're here for the long haul. We want them to prepare the economy for 30 or 40 years down the road. So in Roosevelt's first 100 days, what do you have? The Tennessee Valley Authority, the Rural Electrification Administration, parts of Appalachia, big parts of this country that had been in darkness, literally, forever, suddenly had electricity, refrigeration, light bulbs. You know, it was public power that did it. It was public power that gave us a nuclear industry, the Manhattan Project. It wasn't the private sector, it wasn't outsourcing everything. And this is my frustration with the Democratic Party. Is, you know, even Dwight Eisenhower, President Eisenhower in his farewell address, people remember that farewell address because he warned about a military-industrial complex. He also talked about the need to balance the public and private sector. That if it falls out of balance, both are worse off for it. You can't have a strong free market economy if you don't have a strong public infrastructure. Infrastructure of roads, of hospitals, of universities, of K-12. And you can't have a strong public sector if you don't have a good free market economy with a tax base to pay and to support the public sector. And you take a look at the world we're in right now. This is not a good free market economy. It's a crony capitalist system where industries are dominated by 3 or 4 big companies in each industry. There's not free market competition between them. While on Main Street, I know in Hollywood where I am, restaurants go out of business, small businesses have tough time getting credit, having customers. You know, this economy shifted upside down, and that crony capitalism is supported by crony politics. It's supported by a political system that is bought and paid for by these politicians, and that's what's got to change. That's why Bernie was so inspiring to me and to so many others, that he was willing to say, I'm not going to take that corporate money. I'm going to rely on all of you, on the grassroots of this country, to come together. And it's got to happen more than just one presidential campaign of Bernie Sanders. It's got to happen more than one campaign like I had. This has to be that something that becomes the model for progressive grassroots organizing and change, especially in 2018. If there's ever a year that we got to come back strong, this isn't a Republican or a Democratic issue. I think you find progressives and populists in all across the spectrum. And we tie our wagons to one party or another, but unfortunately these 2 main parties right now are corporate owned. It's a duopoly. Yes, Jackie?
I was just going to say, if these 2 parties are corporatists, as you say, and I am of course going to reveal my view, what's your view about a third party?
So the question is the view of a third party. You know, I had become so down about the Democratic Party, and I had worked on Capitol Hill back in the 1980s. I was a staffer for the late U.S. Senator Paul Tsongas from Massachusetts. Worked there for a couple of years. Paul was first Peace Corps class. He's a good guy, and his widow is a congresswoman, Nikki, from his old district in Lowell right now. So I was a lifelong Democrat, and in 2012, I registered as a non-party affiliation. For 3 years, I was an independent. Wasserman Schultz tried to use that against me. I'm not really a Democrat. You know, and I say it reminds me of what Ronald Reagan used to say about the Democrats. He used to be a Democrat himself. And he said he didn't leave the Democratic Party, the Democratic Party left him. And that's certainly how I felt. I was tired of being on the losing end of so many battles, where, you know, I fought for Barack Obama in 2008. He comes into office, and within weeks, actually before he's in office, within weeks of his election, in November of 2008, he announces his Wall Street team. Larry Summers, Timothy Geithner, the wrecking crew under Bill Clinton that deregulated everything. So I got tired of just being a Democrat, and I voted for Barack Obama again in 2012. But the way I reconciled it was I was not going to be a Democrat at that point. I was going to work for change outside the party. So part of me does believe and want to believe in third-party movements. They don't happen easily. They don't happen often. The time might be coming for a third party in this country because both these parties are seen as big failures. The Democratic Party is now at the weakest point it's been in since 1920. 32 states now have legislatures that are Republican. If 2 more states turn Republican, they could have a constitutional convention and rewrite the Constitution, maybe in the way that the Koch brothers want. Perhaps. Democrats can't afford to lose more states to Republicans. Democrats in Congress are at the weakest level they've been since 1928. And in the last 6 years, Democrats have lost over 1,000 legislative seats in the country. During most of that time, Debbie Wasserman Schultz was the head of the DNC. Okay, so the way I look at it is she is still perhaps the most visible personification of the corruption and the scandal and the failure of the Democratic Party. And I wake up after having gone through that tough campaign. We started a political group called Progress for All. That's where Carolyn probably became aware of our activism on the Sable Trail pipeline and a lot of other issues. And at the end of the day, she's still my congresswoman, and I still want her gone. And we're going to try to do something about it. Now, I re-registered Democrat to run against her. And that makes me a Democrat once again. The way I look at it is progressives have to be organizing across the spectrum. Progressives have to try to change the Democratic Party within the party. There are progressives who are active in third parties, whether it's the Green Party or others. And there are even, I don't know if I should use the word progressive, but populists in the Republican Party who want real change in the Republican Party. They see the same things that Democrats are saying, who are grassroots Democrats who are upset with the direction of our party. They want to take money out of politics. They want integrity in the system. These are old-fashioned values that are missing at this point. We have a corrupt political order, and we need integrity back in the system. So I'm willing to work with folks, whether they're Republican, Green, Democrat, or whatever. Yes?
My name is Victoria. I'm here from Clay County. I'm very passionate about water protection, so I'd like to pull us back in that direction.
Thank you. Absolutely.
We know politics is corrupt. We know it needs to be changed, but what do
we do as individual citizens to stay focused on the water issues, the environmental issues, the energy issues, and to help bring about change in that direction? And let's put the politics aside. We already understand the politicians are not listening. So it does get back to the divestment movement, I think. You know, I'll tell you, on social media, for me, I wasn't that aware of the pipelines. Again, I was aware of fracking as a problem. And then I learned about Sable Trail after it was well under construction and had been green lighted. So it's amazing how these pipelines run under the radar, and ordinary citizens don't even know they're being built. These liquefied natural gas facilities I mentioned, in Florida, they're subject to far less regulation than in New England. And we held a forum in Hollywood Beach not long ago, Progress for All did. And one of our experts who studies nothing but liquefied natural gas facilities said that these are ticking time bombs, basically. That if a vapor cloud leaks, it will combust, and there will be like a radius of a square mile at least, where anything there will be vaporized. You won't even find bodies. I mean, again, it might not happen in our lifetimes, but we're walking down a path where that will happen sooner or later.
Sable Trail is right next to the school, isn't it?
Absolutely.
It's ridiculous.
So I'd say, as ordinary folks, first of all, you can't be complacent. You've got to be very proactive in trying to find this information out. Also, when I would look on the web, I remember seeing a map of the United States, and many of you maybe have seen this, where it shows where all the pipelines are that are under construction. And that was an eye-opener. It's all over this country, in some very fragile areas, environmentally speaking. So it is a way that the fossil fuel industry is trying to double down, and they don't want to lose out on the returns of their sunken investments. They're going to put off a transition to solar for as long as they can. I would say, I would start with whatever universities are nearby in your community that have endowments and start trying to organize students. It's difficult to organize on campus as a Democrat or as a Republican. Most private campuses really don't allow that kind of political organizing, but they usually have environmental groups. You can do that kind of organizing. When I was a professor going through the wilderness, I went out to Albuquerque to teach at the University of New Mexico where I first got tenured. A student group started protesting on campus, and I don't take credit for it. I was not part of this. And they were protesting against the World Bank. And the university listened to that protest. It was probably 20 or 30 students making a lot of noise. And the university created a special select committee to study the university's investment policies, because the students had protested against the endowment investing in World Bank bonds. And I'd been a law professor at University of New Mexico writing about the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. And I can tell you the privatizations then, right now, we see North Miami Beach privatizing its water supply. It's happening in this country. But back then, this was something the IMF and the World Bank were imposing on poor countries around the world. They were loan conditions. If you want loans from the IMF to stabilize your currency, you better start putting your entire economy up on a fire sale and privatizing your waterworks, among other things. So the dean of my law school called me up and asked if I would sit on the select committee to study the university's endowment and its investment policies. And that committee ended up being the first and maybe the only university in the country to ever ban investments in World Bank bonds. And we also proposed, and they accepted, an investment policy that something like a quarter of the endowment would be invested in socially responsible investments. So it can happen. The problem is there are very few universities in the state where students are even trying to make it happen. University of South Tampa, there was a report on social media about 3 or 4 weeks ago or so that the students there are actually agitating for socially responsible investment. They want divestment from fossil fuels and from private prisons. Those were two of the big ones I remember them talking about. You know, universities should be places of learning. Young folks are not getting out there and voting. A lot of them are being turned off and very cynical about anything they can do to change things. What everyone in this room can do is try to start engaging again with college-age students, whether it's on a campus or off a campus, and doing some research on your own to try to find out what does that university invest in. They usually have big endowments, and try to start banging the pots and pans, start agitating to get them to divest from fossil fuel economy, from private prisons, to a healthier economy and a healthier future. That's what I would start doing right now.
The universities, and what can you do on
And-
the local level? I mean, is there any way to, like, how does Seattle get their?
At the local level, a Seattle city commissioner brought up the resolution, tied Wells Fargo to DAPL, to the Dakota Access Pipeline. Wells Fargo had a $3 billion contract with Seattle, and they made the case. You know, democracy only works if there's a lot of agitation and discussion and debate. What the mainstream media and the establishment parties do is it tamps down that discussion and debate. You know, you turn on the cable news and it's all about Russia and nothing else. They don't want us to be talking about pipelines and things. So a lot of information's out there. I would encourage folks to go to progressforall.org. We've got not just links and articles on the Sabal Trail pipeline, but we've got a list of financial institutions that you should divest from, and we've got a shorter list of some financial institutions that do invest in solar and a green economy.
Thank you.
You're welcome. There are a whole bunch of other hands up. How do you? Oh, yes. Carolyn also reminds us that you can personally divest. I personally divested when I moved back to Florida because that was naturally a good time. You got to open up the bank accounts, get new, payroll deposit to the new bank account. So I did it then, but certainly I would encourage everyone to do that as well. Credit unions are usually good. Again, go to progressworld.org. You'll see there's a bank located in Orlando with a branch in Fort Lauderdale called the First Green Bank, and we've been working with them. They're very progressive on these energy issues. Okay, I'm going to start picking hands up that are way high, so I see one right there. I'm pointing to you, ma'am. Yes? You're passing me the wall. Okay.
So, yeah, thanks. I'm Dennis Gould. I'm an adjunct professor at Leydon. And I wanted to ask a question that's more kind of back on the pipeline.
Yes.
The Sable Trail one sounds like they're just about ready to turn the switch on. So the divestment thing kind of makes sense because it's kind of in place and we want to try to get people
Yes.
to realize it was a bad decision. It's been my experience that more investment money follows the first pipeline. So is there anything in the wings that you heard about another pipeline coming in that we might be able to take a different tack on? One that hasn't been built yet that maybe people are thinking about, companies thinking about investing?
I think these liquefied natural gas facilities are an example of what you're saying, that investment follows that first investment. And I think those LNG facilities are something that we do need to confront and try to stop. Now, I mentioned that if you put solar panels along the 515-mile pipeline route on just half the acreage, you get more energy. A lot of folks are already saying that fight's over. They're about to turn the switch on. The gas is going to start running through Sable Trail. There's nothing you can do about it. You're talking to someone as a college freshman. I was evacuated. My campus was evacuated because of the 3 Mile Island nuclear power plant that was melting down. Okay, and nuclear facilities get decommissioned. You could decommission this pipeline at some point. I would say don't give up the fight just because the gas is running through it. Every week there's now reports on violations, environmental code violations on that pipeline. And we posted a couple of those articles on our Facebook page in the past week or two. Sooner or later, those environmental code violations aren't going to be minor ones, they're going to be very big ones, probably. So I would say don't give up the fight just because the gas is flowing through it, and just because it maybe is being exported in the form of liquefied natural gas. I think we got to keep fighting it, we got to keep making the argument that it's never too late to convert to solar. It used to be, I think 20 years ago, if you spoke about solar, people looked at you like you really were kind of a green nut or something. Seriously, it is true. But the way the technology is developed at this point, it's an economically vibrant industry, mostly in China and Germany, I think. Not here the way it should be. Obama had one company, Solyndra, that lost $100 million and that was it. Can you imagine if in World War II, with the Manhattan Project, they looked at a quarterly report and said, Los Alamos Labs lost $100 million this quarter, shut down that energy industry. Nuclear energy is not feasible. That's essentially what they did. And they decided to allow imports of cheap solar panels from China to swamp our industry as well.
Just on another tack, how do you get an energy company like FPL to be logical? I mean, I've got my...
To be logical? I don't think you do.
Let me
Yes.
just tell you this a little further.
Sure.
Because I've got my class here, and I think they've heard me say if I was an energy company, I'd be putting a lot of money into solar and wind because that's the only way I'm going to stay an energy company. How do you get companies like that to realize that their future is in renewable?
The problem is, so the question was, how do you get these energy companies to invest in renewables and to understand that that's where the profits of the future are? The problem is, you're looking at a company, an energy company, whether it's Mobil or Duke Energy or whatever, they've already got on their books billions of dollars in investments in oil and gas. And if they start really converting to solar, it undermines their existing investments. It's interesting to think about this issue, or these issues, in terms of eminent domain. I mentioned it in terms of, in the context of the big sugar farm south of Okeechobee, that the taxpayers of the state wanted to exercise the power of eminent domain that we see in the U.S. Constitution, we see it in the Florida Constitution. Every Constitution allows the state, the public sector, to take private property for a public use and pay just compensation. That's how we build freeways sometimes. Well, they wanted to do it with Okeechobee, it didn't happen. It's being used for the Sable Trail pipeline. And so see how it's been perverted. A private consortium of companies are taking private land for public use. Well, the public will use the gas eventually, but it is, and for export and for profits, it's really for private use. It's getting to the point where we need public options in energy, we need public utilities that are publicly owned, and perhaps we need to start talking about using eminent domain to buy out the shareholders of Florida Power and Light. In the third back row, and then the front row. Yes.
It's a good point, time for me to point out that starting a solar cooperative in St. Augustine, a lot of people, about 75 to 100 people are on board with it. I've got flyers here. We're having a meeting in this room a week from today at 7 o'clock.
A solar cooperative.
Yes.
Fantastic.
People that have installed solar are going to talk about how it went for them, and then the people that are interested in starting this cooperative are going to get together. We'll have a lot of literature and question and answers.
Wonderful. Thank you. Front row.
Yeah, this is a, you don't have to answer this question. Just have to, but a lot of us are very supporting Bernie Sanders to come down here to help you.
Yeah.
I mean, he could have been a justice anyway.
Yeah.
More,
Yeah, so I was just asked, and thank you for saying I don't have to answer it, but I was asked, a lot of folks were disappointed when Bernie didn't come down to campaign with me and for me. You know, when he endorsed us, I was surprised. I never went looking for an endorsement. I don't know if he'll ever endorse somebody else running against an incumbent Democrat. Again, I think they were very unusual circumstances. And from the best that I've heard from sources, he was scared off to come down here in part from Chuck Schumer and others who delivered the word that if he played ball, he would be the Senate Budget Committee chair if the Democrats took the Senate, and that's why he didn't come. It was a little damaging at the end, I'll say, because the press had gotten so excited. Bernie had said at the convention, he had mentioned our campaign. He said he was going to come down here. And then when he didn't, all the press wanted to talk about was, where's Bernie? You know, I held a press conference about Big Sugar. I had a glass of that contaminated water that came out of Okeechobee. They only wanted to talk about Bernie, and that's what the headlines were. I don't think it would have made a difference in the outcome. I don't. So I'm not harboring any ill will towards Bernie for that.
right, the real purpose of my asking that question is a lot of us witnessed something about the time that Sanders went to the White House, about the time that Hillary Clinton, when the nomination was installed as a nominee, and Bernie sort of gave up. She was sitting here in this shirt, walked out. So, what is going? What do you think is going on? I think this is the point of dangerous to run against Debbie Wasserman Schultz.
Dangerous is my business. Yeah, there's a media blackout on a lot of things. One story that gets some attention is the lawsuit that's been brought against the Democratic National Committee in federal court in Fort Lauderdale. And this is a class action lawsuit brought by the plaintiffs. The class, I believe, are people who contributed to Bernie Sanders' campaign, which includes me then. And the argument is that the DNC's charter requires DNC officials to be fair, neutral, and impartial in the presidential nominating process. That all of the WikiLeaks disclosures shows that Wasserman Schultz and the DNC were very far from being neutral and impartial, and that these folks would not have donated money to Bernie's campaign if they knew that the fix was in, that the DNC was not being neutral and impartial. That's the gravamen of the complaint. There was a motion to dismiss brought by Wasserman Schultz's lawyers. Federal judge held a hearing about a month ago. At that hearing, the lawyers for Wasserman Schultz and the DNC made the argument that even that the DNC was not obligated to follow its charter, that they could choose a presidential nominee in a smoke-filled back room. And the judge apparently was shaking his head. Let's see how the judge rules. The question you're asking is a serious one, and I don't know exactly how to answer it. I hear a lot of conspiracy theories all the time, and they're not all just Russia. A lot of them are DNC conspiracy theories. You know, we just had a federal prosecutor wash up on the shores of Hollywood Beach, a 5-minute walk from where I live. People are scratching their heads and wondering what that's about. It might have nothing to do with the DNC. I'm not here alleging it does. I do know I got an awful lot of phone calls in a couple of days span saying, Tim, watch your back. Okay? This is a time right now that requires a lot of courage from everyone. People not to be complacent. The thing I love about this movement is the movement is a movement filled with heroes. You know, I was a visible representative of the movement, but I wouldn't have been there if I wasn't carried on the shoulders of 200,000 donations, $17 donations. And there's something that everyone can do, whether it's making phone calls or knocking on doors or contributing small amounts. And you know, we can be down, we can be defeated, so to speak, but we're undefeated. You know, 2018 did not come out the way a lot of us wanted to. The only alternative is to get back up on our feet, brush ourselves off, and go back at it. Yes,
Jen. Back to the environment, I wanted to say, we seem to find out from the North Dakota situation about the environmental impact studies that right now look to not have been done illegal. How in Florida do we keep track of these studies?
So the Sierra Club, I believe, has brought a lawsuit against the Sabal Trail Pipeline exactly for non-compliance with the environmental regulations. There is Spectra Busters that I joined. Spectra Energy is the consortium that's building the Sabal Trail Pipeline. It's a consortium that includes NextEra, Florida Power and Light, Duke Energy. So these folks that are watchdogs, that are watching Spectra Energy, they call themselves Spectra Busters. They keep track of these lawsuits. Up on progressforall.org, we keep track of the lawsuits. We try to report on it a lot. John Porterman is the head of Spectra Busters. He wrote a great piece that we put on our Progress for All blog recently. Those lawsuits are important, and they might be the only way to stop these pipelines, and there's no guarantee, of course. The gentleman with the black hat on.
With Scott evidently trying to polish up this environmental image, and I can't imagine why. Is anything, are you aware of any documentation of the environmental record of the Scott administration and the legislature during his administration? So, essentially a chronicle or a history of some of the effects on the environment, of his environmental record, or the record during this.
It's a great question. You know, I'm aware of a number of things that the Scott administration, Governor Rick Scott's administration has done that has been very detrimental to the environment. But you're asking, is there sort of one?
Are you aware of anything?
You know, I'm not aware of sort of one macro study or an indictment, you could say, of his environmental record. You would assume, well, I hear that Rick Scott's going to run for the U.S. Senate, right, against Bill Nelson. And assuming Bill Nelson has no primary challenge, he'll be the nominee. You would think the Nelson campaign should be coming up with that kind of a study. You know, the Scott administration, you hear everything from banning the words climate change to what they did last year. They weakened the clean water requirements in Florida to allow higher levels of methane gas and other toxins that are found in the fracking process. And they got away with that. He stacked the commission that makes those water rules with industry folks. So I hope this is going to be an issue that's going to be used against him. But you know, I don't want to say he's riding high, but he's coming out of this legislative session having signed a bill to start dealing with the problem of Lake Okeechobee. You know, you can see that he's trying to position himself well for this Senate run. And Perhaps it'll depend who's on the top of the Democratic ticket running for governor as well. That might help a candidate like Bill Nelson. I just wanted to make sure there's no one else, because you've already raised your hand. I just wanted to see if there's anyone else. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, you mentioned about Germany having all these new ways with their using solar and such. What can we do that they're doing, and or how did they get to that point, and what candidates do you see running for a higher office that will see that some of those things will go into effect?
So the question is, what is Germany doing that we should be doing to get us to a solar economy, and what candidates are out there or elected officials who are already talking about this? Now, some of what I already mentioned would be relevant. Germany has public sector infrastructure banks that I think help get them there. They also have more publicly owned electric utility companies that are going to be less concerned with the quarterly profit, the quarterly, return of pennies on the dollar to the shareholders. So it's a different corporate climate to some degree. What I found interesting in the British election, you saw the conservative Tory candidate, Theresa May, stumble. And part of her stumbling, actually, ironically, was that she started moving towards the left on some issues which angered her base on the right. Well, the issues she started moving to the left on, I was really kind of astounded. She proposed having labor sit on company boards, on the boards of directors of large publicly held corporations. That's something that's been going on in Germany for decades, and Sweden, and the Netherlands, and probably a few other European countries. And you think about it, you take a look at the corporations in this country, and I don't mean to go off for a long time, but I teach corporations. You take a look at the corporate governance. The boards of directors are pretty much handpicked by the CEO, and they rubber stamp the CEO. And then we're surprised that in Germany, the CEO makes about 20, 25 times as much money as the rank and file worker of that company. And in the US, the CEO makes close to 500 times as much, okay? And everything's geared towards the quarterly profit and the return in the US, which means let's fight environmental regulations. Let's fight labor standards. Let's have free trade with countries that don't have environmental and labor standards. It's very difficult to have investments that are long-term in the public interest when you have that kind of a corporate governance structure. So here, look, I used to say this all the time as a professor, and folks would push back and say that's contrary to American cultural, political traditions. We have weak labor unions now. I know everyone likes to beat up on labor, but the private sector unionization rate is like less than 7% now. Okay, so good luck getting your labor representatives on corporate boards. But then I started thinking, well, what is consistent with American cultural traditions? And I thought, the lottery and Powerball. We should have lotteries where you don't win $1 million, you get a seat on a company board. We call it Powerball. I actually gave those talks at academic conferences, and I said, I know it sounds ridiculous, but the present system deserves ridicule. There's no corporate accountability, there's no democracy of these accountability of these corporate boards. As far as what politicians are out there saying this stuff, Andrew Gillum, I've seen Andrew Gillum speak a couple of times, and he is, his solar platform is a very good one. He's the mayor of Tallahassee. He's running for governor as a Democrat. I'm certainly taking a look at Andrew Gillum. Bernie Sanders, of course, is out there setting the standard on a lot of these issues. It depends. I got to probably research more candidates. Unfortunately, for the last year, the candidate or the politician I researched the most is the one I'm running against. So further back, one row back.
So just to bring maybe a brighter response on this?
Yes.
I have two sons, they're 19 and 22, and what I've noticed about their generation, not to shift responsibility to them,
that they view the world differently. And, you know, I heard about this kid who's 22 years old that's trying to figure out how to gather all the trash in the ocean, and that's slow. And I do believe that that is an X factor that's coming up. They, you know, I know a young man who was brought up very conservative, Baptist, he thinks they should marry. He doesn't have the same social mores and the, you know, narrow point of view that his parents do. So I do feel that there is some optimism to be had for the next generation coming up. They seem to be much more socially minded, much more environmentally aware. I don't know if maybe I'm a little distorted in that, what I see, but I just thought I'd like to hear.
I like hearing that perspective, and I see that too. You know, I teach at a law school, so I'm around kids, young adults who have just graduated from college. I think you're absolutely right. This millennial and the Gen Xers, they're much more socially liberal.
They supported Bernie.
They supported Bernie overwhelmingly. You know, what they are lacking, quite frankly, is any kind of historical context to put things in. And that's a little bit shocking, is to see law students who have graduated college and gone through the K-12, and apparently in high school, and I hear this from a colleague of mine whose two kids just graduated public high schools, the social studies, the history, they teach to the test. And the test is geared towards post-Civil War Reconstruction, which is interesting, and I don't mean to say anything bad about post-Civil War Reconstruction. But not that many of these students that I come into contact with can tell you who the American presidents have been since Ronald Reagan, let alone Franklin Roosevelt. So, you know, I do think that there's a lot of reason to be very hopeful about this generation. They are socially much more liberal-minded. They are. And they are more environmentally conscious. And they are drawn to politicians like Bernie, who are authentic and speak the truth. And so I'm very hopeful in that regard, too.
I just want to add that if you just Google kids sue federal government, you'll find out that our federal government has 30 days to answer a lawsuit being filed by children. Kids, yes. They're taking kids.
What are they suing over?
They're suing them over the natural resources of our country being like a big issue for their future. These kids went to the UN and spoke, and my husband's phone just said, but I promise you that if you just simply Google kids sue federal government, you'll find out, I think it's like Save the Future, you know, things that we would name something. Either way, I want you to have not just the hope that the kids are taking charge, but they are learning law at 12 years old, and they're going against it, and the judges gave them the go-ahead to do this.
You know, my campaign, it was very unusual to run a campaign when you're running against the head of the DNC and the establishment. You don't know who you can trust, really. I thought I needed an election lawyer, the first Democratic election lawyer that would agree to represent me, who didn't have a conflict of interest. Turned out, we believe, was actually a mole trying to get information about the campaign. My communications director as well for a while. It was incredible. I mean, so we hired a Republican election lawyer. We did. Who's still with me. It's very loyal. It's more trustworthy than people close to Wasserman Schultz. But the reason I brought up my campaign was, you know, we started raising all this money in the first quarter of 2016, and we were trying to develop a grassroots canvassing operation, and we didn't really know who we could trust, you know, on the ground to help recruit that. And what was holding it back was that as long as Bernie seemed viable, you know, before the March 15th, I think, Democratic primary here in Florida, you couldn't get young folks to come your way. The moment it seemed like the tide had turned in people's minds that maybe Bernie wasn't going to do it, we had a flood of young folks come from all over the country. One of the big expenses we had was we had 2 houses that we rented. They probably should have done reality shows in these houses. They were filled with young millennials who were out there knocking on doors every day for the campaign. These are idealistic kids. You know, I look at how Obama got elected in 08. millennials and Gen Xers were really out there. You know, si se puede, there was so much energy for Obama. And my frustration was I felt he turned his back. There were no New Deal job programs. And that generation, you look at that generation now, between 18 and 34 years old, they're more likely to be living at home with their parents than to be living on their
But
own.
he tried to pass a jobs bill. Do you remember? He said, pass this bill, the jobs bill.
And he couldn't get his own party that had majorities to pass it. I know.
It didn't pass.
Yeah, I know. Yes,
So we'll be a little brave here.
yes.
When you were in South Florida, when you made this decision to run against Debbie Wasserman Schultz,
Yes.
imagine if you were in St. Johns County.
Red, no, it's,
So I want to know the defining moment for you, because I love hearing your story about renting the house for the kids and everything. What was it, what was the moment, or what was it that pushed you to run against Debbie Wasserman Schultz?
what was the defining moment? The moment I decided to run against her. I often say it was 3 words, and it's not enough is enough. That was Bernie's 3 words. Mine were fuck this shit. Sorry, to the adult audience. To the adult audience, but that is how I felt. And the defining moment probably was when she locked Bernie out, when she denied access to the van voter database, when Bernie raised $1 million in one day, and of course, at this point, a lot of people were putting the bug in my ear. My labor friends were. Tim, nobody else is doing it, you gotta do it. I was afraid. I was afraid. There were people, when I would call up and say, you know, somebody suggested you might be able to do a website for me. This is somebody in the Beltway who does political websites. Oh, sure. What's your base? Well, I'm thinking of running against Debbie Wasserman Schultz in a primary. Click. You know? So there was a lot to be afraid of. But at that moment, when I saw how much support was out there in this country to help Bernie, and that she was probably one of the biggest threats to Bernie's campaign, I thought, he's calling for a political revolution. He's calling for ordinary folks to do extraordinary things, to do things outside their comfort zones. I thought, if I were in the race that day, I would have raised a couple $100,000 that day. And if I raised the money, I can build a campaign. And really what it comes down to, we're talking about the politics of speaking the truth. That's what this movement is about. You speak the truth and you wake people up. You shake them, you get them off the sofas, you wake them up. Because what we're against is not the politics of truth. It's the politics of I have one position for public and one position for private. Because the private donors won't let me do, you know, anything else. So at that moment I realized, yeah, if I jump in, as crazy as it sounds, I'd never run for Congress before or anything before. I thought the grassroots is already there, the people are ahead, the people are leading, I'm going to try to catch up and help. I've got to like my cousin Gene. Yes. How about I take 2? One here and also Gene. Gene, you had your hand up?
Twice tonight, you came very close to saying what you told us at dinner.
Uh-oh. What was that?
And that you didn't want to, or that you voted go public later this week.
Yeah.
Thursday.
Thursday is the day that we set for a big announcement.
Google here, a few minutes ago. Miami Herald ran today that you've already made it official.
Well, the Miami Herald story actually, I think, says we're not sure if Canova is going to announce he's running against Wasserman Schultz or Bill Nelson or for the governors. I think that's what the Miami Herald piece said. Well, you guys can already guess. There's a fight we started last year that we got to finish. And thank you, Gene. That's the last time I confide in you over dinner. And, you know, so the campaign infrastructure in a way has been dormant, but there's still timcanova.com. And, you know, in the coming days, I certainly would appreciate, I know a lot of folks here already contributed to the campaign last time, and some folks here phone banked. And I said, I appreciate that so much. Wasserman Schultz used to always attack me and say, he takes outside money. He takes money, 90% of the money comes from outside of Florida. And it was true. You know, school teachers and nurses and you name it from all over the country. And I said, yeah, I'm proud that the American people are behind this campaign. And 2/3 of your money, Debbie, comes from outside the state of Florida, from corporations chartered in Delaware and New York. And we had more donors inside our own district than she did, and she had a 25-year head start. So, you know, we're going to need all kinds of help again. We're still up against a powerful machine. And, you know, anything that folks can do here to spread the word and help, certainly we'll appreciate.
We're with you, too.
Thank you.